Imagine for just a second that the situation I'm about to describe happens to you. You're sitting down in front of the TV, cold drink in hand, and you're excited. Why? Well, because you're sitting down to watch the highly anticipated final episode of a show that's had you hooked since the very first episode. All the character drama, the overarching plots, and conflicts have led to this very moment, and you're just hoping that the conclusion is as satisfying as the journey that led you here. As the clock ticks down closer and closer to the airtime, you and potentially multiple thousands of other fans are getting comfortable and ready. However, when the show's time frame hits, plans have changed. Where the intro to the final episode would usually be, instead, you get this. Footage of a boat briskly floating down a scenic river as joyous and uplifting piano music accompanies the visuals. Confusion quickly becomes disappointment, as it becomes apparent that plans have changed and the episode will not be airing today. Disappointment overcomes you. For most of us, we'll never experience anything like this, especially with most people these days relying on streaming services for their shows and movies. But what if I told you that the exact situation I just described actually took place in the year 2007, where in Japan potentially multiple thousands of TVs displayed this very footage instead of the final episode of a well-known anime series? In a situation that quickly became one of the most prolific and long-running memes in the entirety of the online anime community, what many people describe as the nice boat incident. In this video, I'm telling that very story. The time an anime series' final episode was delayed because of a nice fucking boat. In the year 2005, the Japanese video game development studio Overflow would release an adult eroge visual novel by the name of School Days, which to this day is one of the studio's more well-known and beloved projects. The game sees the player take control of a first-year high school student named Makoto Ito, where at the start of the game he finds himself attracted to one of his classmates, a girl named Kotonoha Katsura, who he meets while commuting to school via the train. However, during the course of the game, Makoto befriends numerous other characters, which the player can choose to engage with both romantically and intimately, as each new choice made by the player leads the player down alternate branching story paths. Being an adult visual novel, the game heavily features censored pornographic content which I can't show on YouTube, but that's not the only reason why this game has become so notorious with players all around the world. School Days was a big deal at the time, as one of the game's biggest selling points was the prevalence of fully animated cutscenes and fully voiced dialogue, which at the time was an impressive feat in the genre. But probably the most well-known and notorious fact about School Days is the fact that the base game has at least 21 possible endings that the player can achieve based on their choices made when controlling Makoto during the course of the story, and that further releases of the title have even more. Despite the game being occasionally pornographic in nature and theoretically existing to help get the player off, the game has become notorious, moreover, for the bad endings which are featured, which are oftentimes surprisingly gory and depressing, usually featuring at least one of the three major characters dying, being murdered, or committing suicide. By all metrics, School Days was a great success, topping release charts multiple times and receiving updated re-releases over the following years, including a port of the game to the PlayStation 2 and the PlayStation Portable with the pornographic content removed. The game was so successful that it would become a cult classic in regions outside of Japan. Fast forward to the year 2007, and School Days had become a pretty lucrative franchise featuring a manga adaptation and many other multimedia works based off it. So it was no surprise to fans when it was announced that an anime adaptation of the series was in the works under the anime production studio TNK. It would begin airing on a handful of major Japanese television stations later that same year. The anime adaptation of School Days is in itself a pretty interesting beast. Despite winning some decent awards and receiving pretty positive reviews from critics early on, if you were a part of the anime community in the late 2000s and early to mid 2010s, you'll know that the anime adaptation of School Days quickly became one of the most hated anime projects ever made. This wasn't even due to production issues or bad voice acting, but instead for its storyline, which many found infuriating, and characters which many described as idiotic and needlessly cruel. For a time, it was hard to find anyone that would publicly say that they liked the show or even make any positive statements towards it. From the perspective of someone who's actually seen the show, I don't think it's nearly as bad as people make it out to be. I theorise that a lot of the hate surrounding the show came from people who had either not seen the show and just wanted to beat the community drum, or for those that had but didn't know that it was an adaptation of the visual novel. Either way, it's pretty difficult to talk about School Days without mentioning the absolutely meteoric hatred that this show received when it initially released. The School Days anime adaptation would air on a handful of different TV stations, the primary station of which being TV Kanagawa, with the show also airing on the channel ATX, an anime-specific channel known for broadcasting uncensored shows. The first episode, titled Confessions, would air on the TV Kanagawa station on July the 3rd of 2007, and the show would continue airing conventionally throughout the next 3 or so months. Which brings us back to the scenario that I described at the top of this video. The date is the 17th of September 2007, the proposed air date for the final episode of the School Days anime. Fans didn't exactly know what would happen to the small ensemble of main characters, but one thing they could say definitively is that it most likely wouldn't be a pretty ending. TNK were at a disadvantage when adapting the story of School Days because, as previously said, the game had at least 21 different endings, and if you've played the games, some of those endings are pretty ambiguous. But most fans of the games knew that we were most likely going to be getting one of the bad endings in the anime adaptation. During the series, we saw the main character Makoto go from a relatively kind-hearted and aloof student to a manipulative womanizer who sleeps around and fobs off the emotions of anyone who gets in the way of his intimate conquests. Katanaha would experience abuse at the hands of classmates which would lead her down a spiral of depression, and there was even the potential pregnancy subplot leading into the finale where Sekai, Makoto's close female friend, allegedly falls pregnant with Makoto's child, leading Makoto to claim that she was trying to purposely ruin his life and that she should get an abortion. All of the character drama and betrayals would come to a head in the final episode, and as those fans originally theorized, the final episode is pretty fucked. So what actually happened in the final episode? What may have caused the whole nice boat incident to ensue to begin with? Well, it's actually time to examine the final episode's contents, so strap in because this is going to get pretty intense, and to tell the entire story of the enigma that is Nice Boat, you actually do need to know what happens in the final episode. So this is Mechabroski's retelling of the final episode of School Days, highly abridged version that is. So Makoto and Kotanaha manage to rebuild some of their completely broken relationship as the two start to see each other again. This is only because, number one, Kotanoha's psyche is so broken at this point that she can't see that Makoto's actions were what led to her downward spiral into depression and her negative reputation amongst her peers. Makoto only wants Kotanoha back after finding out that Sekai could potentially be carrying his child, so he wants nothing to do with her. Sekai, having found out about this secret relationship, is completely devastated and starts to lose her mind as well. While Makoto attempts to cut all contact with Sekai early on, he eventually realizes that he needs to sort this situation out before it gets too far gone, so he begrudgingly contacts Sekai and invites her over to his apartment to talk about potentially getting their potential child aborted. However, Sekai, who enters a trance during the awkward conversation while in the kitchen, grabs a kitchen knife, sneaks up on Makoto, and has had enough. She wants to put an end to this situation definitively. She takes the knife plunges it deep into Makoto's chest, causing him to fall to the ground as he convulses for air. He tries to crawl away, but she mounts him and continues to stab him a further 6 times, before finally snapping out of the trance and realizing what she's just done. She then puts the knife in the sink and leaves the apartment so that Makoto's corpse can be found by someone else. All she needs to do is make sure she's not there when that takes place. So Makoto is dead. I'd say that's already what most people would call a bad end, but trust me, it's... So Sekai dips from Makoto's apartment, leaving his corpse for whoever is unlucky enough to find it. So when Katanaha goes to his apartment to spend time with him and deliver some groceries, she finds his corpse laying right where it was when Sekai was finished using him as a human voodoo doll. Sekai, who is hiding away from the world at this point, overcome with guilt, gets a spontaneous text message from the phone of who else but Makoto, telling her to meet him on the roof of the school. Now, we all know at this point that he's already dead, and you can probably tell where this is going, but just bear with me. Sekai ventures onto the roof, where she doesn't find Makoto standing there, but instead a gym bag sitting on a bench. She goes over to examine it, but before she gets the chance to look inside, she's approached by Katanaha, who instantly questions if she's gone to the hospital to verify if the child she was having with Makoto was legit. The two get into a heated argument as Katanaha accuses Sekai of lying about her pregnancy to steal Makoto away from her, and while Sekai remains adamant that she's telling the truth, Katanaha is not convinced. She urges Sekai to take a look in the gym bag, claiming that if she wants to know who Makoto loves more of the two, she can ask him herself. Inside the bag is the decapitated head of Makoto that Katanaha cut off and brought with her. Sekai is rightfully disgusted. Katanaha coldly pulls out a blade and ominously asks Sekai if she can verify the baby's legitimacy for herself, and then lunges at her, blade in hand, stabbing Sekai in the neck and coldly letting her bleed out on the concrete. Before taking the knife, slicing into Sekai's stomach, and the screen, as it cuts to black, reveals that there is indeed no child. Sekai was lying about her pregnancy and Katanaha could see straight through it. The final scene of the final episode of School Days sees Katanaha laying on the deck of a yacht at sunrise, potentially only happening hours after the death of Makoto and Sekai. Laying on the deck of that yacht, she's gripping the decapitated head of Makoto to her chest and whispers briskly to him that now with Sekai dead, the two of them can love each other forever. Cut to black. That's the end of School Days, and that's the final episode. The final episode of School Days, and more accurately its brutal conclusion, is undoubtedly the most well-known aspect of the entire show. And while it's not really talked about as frequently as it once was, as topics like this usually tend to come and go on the internet over the years, when it comes to the years following 2007, the School Days anime ending was a very prominent talking point for many, as it was genuinely very shocking at the time. While the adaptation had covered some pretty sad and heavy topics up until that point, in the same way that the visual novel it was based off had, the level of violence and brutality was unmatched by anything featured in the prior episodes, and I can definitely imagine that someone watching the show when it was airing, who wasn't fully aware of the source material that it was based off, could be genuinely shocked by the gory conclusion and the juxtaposition of the level of violence in the final episode in comparison to what had been featured in every other one that came before it. But as we already established at the top of this video, when viewers sat down to watch the episode on its original projected air date, they didn't see what I just described, due to the Nice Boat broadcast interruption. So now that I've explained what actually happened in the final episode, it's time to answer the question: why did this happen? On the 17th of September 2007, a day before the episode was intended to air, a 45-year-old police sergeant who worked in the traffic division of the Kyoto Prefecture Police was found dead in his home, suffering from what police described as 30-centimetre long axe wounds to the right side of his neck. He was still in bed when the police found him, and while his wife theorised his death could have potentially been a suicide, his second daughter, a 16-year-old vocational student, would admit to committing the crime, taking the axe and killing her father in his sleep. This recollection of events would make sense, as the police claimed that they found the bloody scene of her dazed and covered in blood with the axe in the lounge room. The only real motive that seems to reveal why this crime happened comes from the 16-year-old who simply stated that she killed her father because she didn't like him. While this story received mainstream media attention and saw some coverage outside of Japan as well, due to the statutes and laws surrounding juvenile crimes, the identity of the perpetrator wasn't publicly released. While details about this crime are relatively hard to come by and are still to this day quite meagre, what we do know is that the real-life murder and tragedy that took place the day before the final episode was the catalyst behind the Nice Boat incident. As it turned out, the show itself or any of its content wasn't really the reason at all, but a real murder that took place and a very inconvenient time frame. Or at least that's the case to an extent. An official statement made by TV Kanagawa states that the reason the final episode was cancelled was, air quotes, in consideration of the impact of the Kyoto incident, directly citing the murder of the 45-year-old police sergeant, but also revealing that the content featured in the last episode was considered to be too similar to the real-world tragedy to allow the episode to go to air. While the final episode's content is different in a lot of ways to the real-life incident, the details that are similar seem to go as follows. Makoto's death doesn't seem to be a big element of the case, but the murder of Sekai at the hands of Kotonoha is where the contention seems to come from. Seeing Kotonoha, a 16-year-old high school student, kill Sekai by slashing her in the neck with what could be described as an axe is the most obvious parallel. Another parallel could also be the fact that she decapitates Makoto by slashing through his neck, in order to bring his decapitated head to the roof of the school. In the aftermath of the murder and the cancellation of the episode, every TV channel known to have aired the series up until that point would suspend and then cancel the show, except for TV ATX, the channel I mentioned before that was known for airing uncensored shows. While the situation was being looked over, ATX held off on cancelling the show for a while, and then announced that they were officially shifting the air date so that audiences could watch what they had missed out on TV. But that wasn't the only way that fans could have watched the final episode, as, quite humorously, Overflow, the developers of the visual novel version of School Days, would go on to hold screenings of an edited and censored version of the episode at the Akihabara 3D movie theatre. Fans who wanted to attend these screenings had to register online at Overflow's official website to get a seat for the viewing, and would also have to bring a copy of the PC version of School Days or Summer Days to verify their identity and gain entry. As trends usually tend to go on the internet, amused onlookers would begin talking about the situation on Japanese message boards and forums. As talks about the topic spread, the term "nice boat" would be coined to describe the incident, and as the situation began spreading to the worldwide anime community and began picking up steam on 4chan, memes were also created to immortalize its existence. The meme would become so large-scale that Yahoo Japan claimed that the search term "nice boat" was the 10th most searched thing on the entirety of their platform for a time. The meme became so massive that even the production teams responsible for making the different School Days media were getting in on it. Overflow would appear at the Comic Market 73 convention with a stall that they humorously titled "Nice Boat," where fans could buy merchandise from the show, including artwork that referenced the meme, and in the second OVA produced in the School Days series titled "Magical Heart Kokoro-chan," the raft scene in the OVA is also titled "Nice Boat." And that, ladies and gents, is the story of the time that an anime adaptation of a visual novel became inexplicably connected to a real-life murder, and the internet saw it as more than enough of a justification to do what it does best: meme. I sometimes wonder if the School Days anime would maintain relevance to this day if the situation had never happened in the way that it did. In a way, the shocking ending along with the crazy circumstances behind its cancellation have done more to immortalise the show in the online anime landscape than the show itself ever probably could have. And ironically, School Days wasn't even the only anime to be affected by the Kyoto murder, as another show titled Higurashi had also seen issues after the tragedy. But at the end of the day, that's the nice boat issue. A weird moment in time and an anime meme that is occasionally mentioned to this day in passing.